Hey YouTube, how's it going? Kevin Cleary with a knife video. Today I've got a really fun comparison to do between two knives that I don't know how to describe other than very similar but very different. Okay, I've got here my Spyderco Domino, which is a great blade, one of my favorites, and another favorite, the Spyderco Manix. Now, Manix 2. If you put these two side by side, you can see they are very, very, very similar. Okay, and so what I want to do in this video is point out that despite the fact that they look very similar, there's actually some significant differences in these knives, other than the obvious saber grind versus flat grind, which we will talk about. That's one of the things this video is going to give me a chance to discuss, is why I really like hollow grinds, even prefer them over flat grinds. The other thing that I'll talk about is, these two knives come in at very different price points. I'll talk a little bit about why that is and what you're getting for that extra $100. Also, I think this video is a great video for the person who owns one of these and is thinking about the other, okay? Because as you look at them, you may go, hey, I've got a Manix and I love my Manix. Seems like I should really like the Domino because look how close they look, okay? Or vice versa. Maybe you say, hey, my Manix is like, my Domino is like my high-end carry. I really like it, but I'd like a day-to-day user. Maybe I should pick up a Manix. And actually, I think that would be a great option. So, let's get right into it and start with size and weight. I am going to put one of these down. I'm not going to try to hold both of them throughout the whole video. That just gets awkward for all of us, but especially for me. So let's start off with the Manix 2. Great knife, made in Golden, Colorado. Weighs in at 5 ounces. It's 8 inches overall, 3 3/8 inch blade, 4 5/8 inch handle. So pretty standard numbers for an EDC blade. This is a little thick, it gets up to around 1 7/8 inches or so. But that's, if you're a Spyderco fan, you're used to that Spidey hole making their blades just a little bit wider than other blades of similar size. Okay, so no big deal there. So again, 5 ounces overall, 5 ounces of weight, 8 inches overall, 3 3/8 inch blade, 4 5/8 inch handle. Switching over to the Domino, before we make any comparisons, here we have a blade that weighs in at only 4.1 ounces. It has a 3 1/8 inch blade, a 4 9/16 inch handle, and comes in overall at 7 11/16. That's just over 7 5/8. Okay, so not quite 7 3/4, not quite 7 5/8, and so it is smaller dimensionally and in terms of its mass. And I've got to add here that it feels smaller in hand. Okay, so one of the differences between these two, they're close in size, and if you look at them side by side, you go, yeah, they're not that different. But when you get them in hand, you go, actually, they're very different. Okay, so this is one of those things where I say, hey, they look so similar, the blade shapes look similar, but their feel in hand, their functionality is actually different feeling, which is kind of interesting to me. Now, is there a winner here? I don't know that there's a winner other than to say this. The Domino gives you basically all of the functionality of the Manix, but does it for a lighter weight and in a smaller package. So I would give the edge to the Domino, but I will add that I really like both, and I feel like for that extra 1 ounce, I'm getting a knife that feels a little more robust in hand, okay? And I feel like I could maybe get some harder work done with this than with this, even though that's purely my perception. I don't think that's true in reality. I think pretty well anything this could do, this could also do, but the feel in hand is significantly different, okay? Now, what about the blade? The blade is, again, very similar and very different. You go, that doesn't make any sense. Well, let me explain. Despite the fact that the number on the Manix, 3 3/8, is bigger than the number on the Domino, 3 1/8, the blade, the cutting edge, is exactly the same, 3 inches on both of these, okay? Now, the obvious thing to notice is, let me list these differences and then I'll talk about why they matter. The differences in these are S30V versus CTSX HP, full flat grind versus hollow grind, which is a saber grind, and the way the tip is configured in terms of a straight line plane. So the Manix tip is lower, okay? Notice if I hold these this way, if you were to draw sort of a straight line through both of these blades, the Manix tip would be lower than that straight line, the Domino would be closer to the middle. So in some ways the Domino is almost a spear point, where the Manix leans toward a Wharncliffe, where the tip is angled downward. Okay, what difference does that make in performance? I mean, not a whole lot. Certainly there's more usable belly on the Domino. I don't think this is a very good skinning knife, but it has that skinning knife shape to it a little more than the Manix does. The Manix is a little more tip oriented, so you know, if you're trying to cut, maybe cut the tape on a box, you need this angle on the Manix. You need a steeper angle on the Domino to do the same job, okay, because the tip is not angled downward. On the other hand, for most everyday carry tasks, we're going to be using kind of this portion of the blade or this portion of the blade, and it's not going to make much difference. All right, so there is that difference to notice. What about the full flat grind versus the hollow grind? Well, very close. Performance-wise, you're not going to notice a huge difference. I will say this: when you're cutting through a substrate, you're cutting through some material, maybe it's a bunch of cardboard, you know, maybe it's an apple or an orange or a tomato. When you're cutting through some material, a full flat grind is going to perform better than a hollow grind. Okay? Now, when you're just cutting a short cut, let's say you're cutting a piece of rope, let's say you're cutting through a piece of cable, or you're opening a package. In those cases, I think a hollow grind is going to perform better, because with a hollow grind, you can get away with less steel behind the edge. Okay, now I'm going to try to represent this for you with my hands. And you know, obviously this is not a perfect representation, but if my palms represent the secondary bevel, that is the sharpened edge, and my fingers represent the larger grind on the knife. Let me move over a little bit. We have the same secondary bevel on both of these, okay? With a flat ground blade, you have an angle that becomes the grind angle of your blade. With a hollow ground blade, immediately behind that cutting edge, it's almost flat. So a hollow grind is actually able to be flatter than a flat grind. Okay, does that make sense? Now, what that means is, in practical terms, there are a couple things that you can do with a hollow grind that you can't do with a flat grind. Number one of the things I like about a hollow grind, you can use thicker blade stock, like on the Spyderco Techno, or on certain Striders, or you know, a Browse blades, for example. My Browse T4 has super thick blade stock. Lots of knives that I have, super thick blade stock. And by using a hollow grind on that super thick blade stock, you can still get a knife that slices really well, even though it's got a thick blade stock. Now, if you take that blade stock that's very thick and you make it all flat grind, you don't get the same performance out of it, because you're essentially making a wedge, and the wedge is got to be wider and thicker because of the you know, if you start out with blade stock that's thin, well, then the wedge can be quite thin. But if the blade stock is thick, you've got to have a thick wedge, and that means it's not going to slice as well, and really it's not going to cut as well in general. So for all those reasons, especially for an EDC blade, I like a hollow grind. Now, does that mean I don't like flat grinds? No, I think I already told you this is one of my favorite knives. So I still like flat grinds, and I find them extremely useful. And I will say this, the individual, well, I may as well just say, Nut and Fancy is crazy for flat grinds. And by his own admission, he uses his EDC knife for food prep. Okay, well, no, everyone knows, it's pretty obvious that a flat grind is going to be better for food prep than a hollow grind. There's just, you know, there's no comparison, because you're cutting through a lot of material all the time. Okay, I don't really use my EDC blade for food prep, and so for me, that's not an issue at all. All right, so that I hope that gives you some idea about a flat grind versus a hollow grind, and why I actually like a hollow grind on my EDC blade. I don't insist on it. I have lots of blades that have a flat grind that I absolutely love, but I hope you can see where I'm coming from. It lets you get away with thicker steel, which I like. It gives you better edge geometry for most cutting tasks, and it gives you more strength in the knife. You can carry more steel to the tip and get away with it with a hollow grind than you can with a flat grind. There are other blade shapes that achieve a similar end, but I think a hollow grind is one that allows you to get a great cutting performance, even from thick stock, even from a very hard use blade design. All right, so that's hollow grind versus flat grind. The other thing we need to comment on is blade steel. S30V and CTX-XHP? Well, in the knife world right now, CTX-HP is definitely more popular. It's more highly regarded than S30V. In practical purposes, they're going to perform very, very close, okay? In fact, I would suggest that if you gave the average knife user, even me, these two knives and said, go ahead and use these, you know, let's say this was the flat ground Manix, so the edge geometry is the same. Say, go ahead and use these for a week and tell me the differences in the steel. I wouldn't be able to do it. You know, they're both going to hold an edge really well. They're both highly corrosion resistant. They're both very tough steel. You know, unless they're hardened differently, which is a manufacturing issue, not an actual performance. That's not inherent to the steel. You're not going to notice a difference. Okay, so is CTX-XHP a superior steel to S30V? Probably most people would say yes. However, when it comes down to actually using your knife, you're going to notice very little difference between these two steels. Does one of these win? Hard to call a winner on this. Again, it's a matter of personal preference. For me, I really like the edge geometry on the Manix because of that hollow grind. However, I also know most of you who would buy a Manix now are going to have a flat ground blade, which means these are going to be so close that it's going to be ridiculously, like, you're going to have to call it a tie, essentially. Okay, unless, now here's the one difference. The jimping on these two blades, the Manix is definitely way better, and that is across the board. In my experience, it's been true of every Golden Colorado produced knife versus Taichung produced knife. Taichung has great fit and finish, great high quality, but the jimping from the Colorado knives is much better and more grippy on your hand. All right, so that's the blades, and that's how they compare. Can I call one a winner, one a loser? Not really. I'm going to declare that a tie. If you remember, the Domino pulled ahead a little bit in terms of size and weight, tie in terms of blade. How about lockup and deployment? All right. Now, this is a place where, again, these are very, very different. This is, of course, a titanium frame lock. This is a caged ball lock. So let's talk about the caged ball lock first. You guys know it works by a ball bearing being caged inside this piece of plastic, sliding into the blade tang, pushed by a coil spring, and now that blade is locked in place. It's a very strong lock, very dependable, and very smooth. Now, unlike the axis lock, maybe I can, yeah, I can do it, but it's difficult. A Benchmade axis lock, people love it because you can do that one thumb or even one finger, and you can release the knife. With the Manix, I can't do that. I've got to pinch it and pull. Okay, I feel like, you know, at kids' preschools, they used to say pinch and pull for them to clean their noses. That's how you operate a Manix, pinch and pull. All right, so I've got to pinch both sides and pull, and then the blade drops. On the Domino, it's a frame lock, so you guys know the deal. You just release the lock and the blade comes closed. Now, is one of these better than the other? Not really. Which one is going to fail first? Hard to say. I will say this, the Manix performed pretty well in cold steels testing, but the only frame lock that I can think of they've done so far is the 0300, and it did pretty well also. So both of these are strong locks. It's more of a matter of personal preference which one you like. Now, on the other hand, this one is a ball bearing pivot system. This one is just washers with a bushing, okay? So, which one's better? Well, I'm going to be honest. For everyday carry, and especially if it flexes at all toward hard use, I like a washer system better than a ball bearing system. The reason is I've had ball bearings. In fact, I had a knife with a ball bearing pivot system that's now very smooth, but I had to clean it out because there's all kinds of dirt and crap, likely from the manufacturer, like from the factory, where there was kind of grime and crap in the ball bearings, and so it wouldn't flip very well. I cleaned them up and put it back together, and now it's one of the smoothest knives I own, but initially it didn't flip well. Now I'm not talking about the Domino, I'm just giving you an example of what can happen with ball bearing pivots, and I have a lot of them. Let's see, I have at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. Like I have 8 or 10 blades that have a ball bearing pivot, okay? So I've got lots of experience with this, and I'm telling you, it can gum up over time, okay? One of the things you almost have to know, you just have to buy into this. If you buy a knife that has ball bearings, it's going to add maintenance. Now, do I also take apart and lubricate my knives that have washers? Yes, I do. So both require maintenance, but this is a tighter system. It's harder for crap to get in there because you've tightened everything down, so there's not really any space in there for stuff to get in. On the other hand, this can't be tightened down. There's space between the ball bearings and the plastic cage that they're in. There's also then space between the knife and the plastic cage because the ball bearings are touching. So there are just more openings in here to allow for junk to get in. And if you carry this in your pocket every day, it's going to get lint in there. It might get, you know, crumbs from whatever you ate before you put your hand in your pocket. You know, whatever you kind of come in contact with, it could get in the knife. All right. So on the washer versus ball bearing, I prefer the washer system. Okay, I just do, and I know that defies conventional wisdom right now. Everyone else really likes ball bearing pivot and talks about that as being a big major, you know, a win for any knife that you get your hands on. Now, where this does really well is the various opening methods. Okay, so this is cool because you can flip it, because you can spider flick it, because you can, you know, open it slowly with the spider ball with your thumb. The Manix, you can spider flick it. Oh, I did it with my left hand. I was a little impressed of myself there. And you can open it with your finger. So both are great. Now here's where I'm going to make a distinction between these two, and this is one of the things that I think you may want to consider if you own one and not the other. I think this lends itself to harder use, you know, more regular EDC than this does, okay, because of those washers. All right, the Domino flips amazingly well. It's super smooth. It comes out really fast, and I love it for all of those reasons. But the Manix has the washers, and I do prefer that. Now there is a limitation on the Manix, and I think this is still true. The Manix does not have what we're used to seeing, where, you know, here's your blade. You're going to put a pivot screw through it. You're going to put a washer on each side, and then you're going to put the handle on, and then it's going to work. That's not how the Manix works. The pin that goes through the blade has a step down on it. So the circle that goes through the blade is this size, and then it has two smaller pieces kind of coming out the side. So it looks like in profile, I know what to do. I've got a child's block here, and I've got a box from a Kershaw knife. So if this is the part of this is the part that goes through the blade, there's a step down in size. So the extra part looks like this. So they're both circles, these are squares, but in profile it looks like that, where there's a slight step. Okay, and that means you can't over tighten the pivot on the Manix, which is great, but it also means if there's a little bit of blade play, and this one does have just a little bit of blade play, nothing you can do. Okay, you're stuck with it because that extra bushing is stopping you from tightening you can't squeeze the washers with the handle at all. The bushing stops you from doing that. Okay, so that's lockup and deployment. Both are good as an everyday carry knife. If you're only going to have one, I prefer washers to ball bearings, but ball bearings are fine if you just kind of know, hey, once a week I'm probably going to have to clean this out with some WD-40 and re-oil it. Okay, now what about by the way, the locks are both strong. You know, I don't think one lock is going to beat the other. How about the handle? Now this is where, even though, again, if you open these knives and look at them side by side, the handles look very, very similar. You've got this choil here, you've got an increasingly narrow sort of butt end here. You've got the front choil. It's tighter and more aggressive on the Manix, and it's more gentle on the Domino. But so they look very, very similar, but they could not feel more different. The Domino is wider, okay, and so it's still very hand-filling because of its width, but it's not as hand-filling as the Manix. All right, you can see if I close my hand on this, there's still a little bit of handle sticking out. If I close my hand on this, it's gone. The fat of my hand comes over the back of the handle. I've complained about that before, and in fact, I would have actually liked to see the Domino. It wouldn't work because of the flipping mechanism. It had to be this way. But if this choil was a little tighter, notice the difference here. This is a smaller choil. It like wraps right around your finger. This one just lets your finger kind of fit in there. If this choil was smaller, it would move your whole hand up just a little bit and give you a little more real estate. Notice that there's this whole section of handle that I can't use on the Domino. Well, it's not the same amount on the Manix. So you've got a smaller handle here, used less efficiently. You've got a larger handle here, used more efficiently. Now both you can choke up on, so that kind of negates the discussion, because if you're doing, you know, closer work, now I've got tons of handle on both. All right, but both are very comfortable, both are very usable. The Manix is no doubt grippier. Okay, there's no getting around that. The Domino is grippy enough, but it is overall smoother than what you're getting with the Manix. Both are very comfortable. Pocket clip is, again, similar but different. Both are the standard 3-screw pocket clips that you get with Spyderco. I've put a Casey Lynch clip on this, and I do much prefer it. The stock Manix carries a little high, or I mean the stock Domino carries a little high. The Manix I actually like better in terms of how much is buried in your pocket. The Domino is just a little too much blade sticking, or a little too much handle sticking out of your pocket with the standard pocket clip. So I've switched this to a Casey Lynch clip. I do have another Casey Lynch clip, and I could put it on here, but I think I'm going to skip that. All right. What else should I say about this? Oh yeah, the lanyard hole, both are going to work for 550 cord. The Manix is bigger, but since this one's big enough for 550 cord, the rest is like, who cares, right? After that. So let's move on to overall. On the handle, I gotta say the Manix wins because it's just bigger and more comfortable and more grippy. Okay, so how do we compare these two knives? What makes up for the difference? Well, there's a big difference in materials. Okay, you've got G10 and stainless steel compared to laminated carbon fiber and titanium. So obviously carbon fiber and titanium are a big upgrade over, you know, stainless steel and G10. Certainly the steel is a higher end steel, and you're getting what I'm going to call a classier, more elegant knife with the Domino. Okay, just is a little more efficient in terms of size and weight, and the blade you're getting for that size and weight as compared to the Manix. On the other hand, the Manix is a very tough, very durable, very capable EDC blade, and I would say, you know, if you have a Domino and it's sort of your high-end carry, the Manix would make a great sort of regular EDC carry. If you have a Manix and you'd like something a little more high-end with some higher-end materials, again, I think you're going to love the Domino if you already like the Manix. One thing I will say is if you really like one of these blades, you probably won't dislike the other. All right? If you really don't like one of them, like let's say you have a Domino and you totally hated it, you probably won't love the Manix. And the same is true the other way. If you don't like the Manix at all and you just got rid of yours as soon as you got it, you probably won't be crazy about the Domino. Maybe the materials or the look or something will win you over. So that's how these compare. Certainly, I would say the Domino is a high-end carry. $200 is the price point. On the other hand, the Manix is fantastic value for dollar. You're getting S30V steel, you're getting a very robust blade, and it's all coming in for about $100. So that's really good. You know, I don't think, you know, the Para 2 would be the closest other Spyderco to this with the S30V and the G10, and the Para 2 is, you know, going to cost you another $25 to $35 over the Manix, and I don't think you're getting a lot more. Now, the ergos and stuff are different, and we'll do a comparison video about that in the future, but the Manix is sort of a value blade, the Domino is sort of a high-end blade, and I like owning both, frankly. So there you go, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. I certainly enjoyed making it. It was a lot of fun to talk about the different aspects of these two knives, and that's why I created this video. It was more my own desire to talk about some of the differences and my interest in those differences. So I hope you enjoyed, and we'll talk to you soon.